Following two major headlines. The first, a bombshell report by the New York Times claiming that after James Comey was fired, FBI officials began looking into whether President Trump was working on behalf of Russia.
And another stunning report by the Washington Post taking a look at the efforts President Trump has made to conceal his conversations with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
All of this as the government shutdown reaches day 24, the longest in U.S. history. Wow. And sadly, there is no end in sight. Good morning, everyone. It's Monday, January 14th. I'm Ayman Mohideen alongside Yasmin Basugian and Louis Bergdorf. We have a lot of news to cover this Monday morning, but we begin with the ongoing government shutdown. New polling shows that Americans are blaming President Trump and the Republican Party much more than Democrats for the current stalemate. According to a Washington Post ABC News poll, 53% say Trump and the Republican Party are mainly at fault, compared to 29% who are blaming the Democrats. Similarly, in a new CNN poll, 55% blame the president, 32% say Democrats are at fault. Now, broken down even further, polling shows that independents point the blame at President Trump rather than Democrats by 53% to 23%. Women, they blame President Trump and the Republicans by a margin of 35 points, while men blame the president and GOP by a margin of 13 points. Now, when asked about the situation at the border, nearly half of all Americans said there is a serious problem, but not a crisis. 26% said it is not a serious problem. 24% of people labeled the situation as a crisis. Now, a majority of Americans say they oppose President Trump declaring a national emergency in order to build a wall, 66% to 31%. And CNN polling shows more than half of Americans oppose building a wall along the border with Mexico, while 39% favor that idea.
All right, let's talk about that New York Times report from over the weekend. President Trump and his allies reacting this weekend to that report. The FBI began investigating whether Trump had been working against American interests on behalf of Russia after the spring 2017 firing of Director Jim Comey. According to former law enforcement officials and others familiar with the probe, counterintelligence investigators had to consider whether the president's actions constituted a possible threat to national security. Agents and senior FBI officials had grown suspicious of Mr. Trump's ties to Russia during the 2016 campaign, but held off on opening an investigation into him, in part because they were uncertain how to proceed with an inquiry of such sensitivity and magnitude. Agents also sought to determine whether Mr. Trump was knowingly working for Russia or had unwittingly fallen under Moscow's influence. No evidence has emerged publicly that Mr. Trump was secretly in contact with or took direction from Russian government officials. The president responded to the story in parts of the 12 tweets he sent on Saturday morning, saying the investigation was opened with, quote, no reason and no proof. He later gave an interview to Fox News.
Are you now, or have you ever worked for Russia, Mr. President?
I think it's the most insulting thing I've ever been asked. I think it's the most insulting article I've ever had written. And if you read the article, you'd see that they found absolutely nothing. But the headline of that article is called The Failing New York Times for a reason. They've gotten me wrong for 3 years. They've actually gotten me wrong for many years before that.
All right, so according to the Times report, two instances in which the president tied the firing of James Comey to the Russia investigation helped prompt the counterintelligence aspect of that inquiry. The first was a letter Mr. Trump wanted to send to Mr. Comey about his firing, but never actually did. In that, he mentioned the Russia investigation, even after the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein wrote a more restrained draft of the letter and told Mr. Trump that he did not have to mention the Russia investigation. Mr. Trump directed Mr. Rosenstein to mention the Russia investigation anyway. Well, the second event was the president tying the firing directly to the Russia probe in his own words with an interview with NBC.
Regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire Comey, knowing there was no good time to do it. And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election.
All right, and coming up on Morning Joe, one of the reporters who broke that story, Michael Schmidt.
And in one of the weekend's bombshell reports, current and former U.S. officials describe in detail to the Washington Post the extraordinary lengths President Trump has gone to hide the details of his private conversations and interactions with Russia's Vladimir Putin. This includes Trump's July 2017 meeting with Putin on the sidelines of the G20 in Hamburg, where the president literally confiscated the notes of his own interpreter and demanded that the official not discuss what transpired with other administration officials. And that came less than 2 months after Trump disclosed classified information to senior Russian officials during the meeting he hosted in the Oval Office. And in another instance, last summer, Trump barred anyone from attending his 2-hour meeting with Putin in Helsinki.
Unbelievable developments there. All right, U.S. officials also tell the Washington Post that there are no detailed records, even in classified files, of President Trump's face-to-face interactions with Putin at 5 different locations over the past 2 years. And officials have had at times judge what went on by U.S. intelligence reports of the Kremlin's action. Those reports are traditionally used by a White House to assess how well they had accomplished the goals of a meeting. However, U.S. intel agencies have reportedly been reluctant to call attention to them during Trump's tenure because they sometimes include insults by foreign officials aimed at the president and his advisors, including Jared Kushner. In a statement, the White House says, quote, "The Washington Post story is so outrageously inaccurate, it doesn't even warrant a response." However, it then gives one adding, quote, "The liberal media has wasted 2 years trying to manufacture a fake collusion scandal instead of reporting the fact that unlike President Obama, who left Russia and other foreign adversaries push them around, President Trump has actually been tough on Russia." The president also responded.
Why not release the conversation that you had with President Putin in Helsinki, along with some other stuff that might involve the FISA, Bruce Orr, and the whole lot of them?
Well, Janine, I would. I don't care. I mean, I had a conversation like every president does. You sit with the president of various countries. I do it with all countries. We had a great conversation. We were talking about Israel and securing Israel and lots of other things. And it was a great conversation. I'm not keeping anything under wraps. I couldn't care less. I mean, it's so ridiculous. These people make it up. Washington Post, that's basically the lobbyist for Amazon. You know, he uses that Bezos, who's got bigger problems than anybody right now. I have many one-on-one. Nobody ever says anything about it. But with Putin, they say, oh, what did they talk about? We talked about very positive things because, look, we are beating everybody. But I mean with Putin, and they make a big deal. Anybody could have listened to that meeting. That meeting is open for grabs.
Perfect. Then let's get the readout. Right? Let's see it.
We're beating everyone. I like that. All right, joining us now, Associate News Editor and reporter for Axios in Washington, D.C., Elena Treen. Elena, great to have you with us. So let's talk a little bit about these developments and what they signal about the ongoing Russia investigation. Pretty significant developments over the past 72 hours.
Extremely significant, and I think that from all of the sources both on the Hill and at the White House that I've spoken with, I don't think these reports are sitting well with anyone, and Republicans and Democrats alike find these very damaging, and I think that a lot of people are still, you know, a little bit hesitant to outright, forthright call out the president on this. They want to see more of what's going on, and a lot of people, especially people on the Hill and the New Democrats, I think, who are elected into this freshman class, they really want to see what's going on with this Mueller investigation. They want to see that play out. But I think that this is really great ammunition for a lot of the fights that we, I think, are posed to see this year now that Democrats have taken back the House majority. And I think that this will only add more fuel to all of the subpoenas and other investigations that they plan to launch on the president and this administration.
So let's go with that for a second. As you said, this could be more ammunition. What does this mean for the president standing in Washington right now, considering the fact that the Democrats now have control of the House, A? And B, also, how does this really play into the Mueller probe, if at all?
Well, so for the Democratic side of this and the investigations, I think I've been speaking with a lot of them about, you know, where this stands for the impeachment talk. I think a lot of Democratic leaders have been really hesitant to use that word, and they find it, you know, premature and a bit politically trepidatious. But I think that with that, I think impeachment talk and all of this people have been saying they really want to watch how the Mueller investigation plays out. And I think that when we see these reports and we see how damaging, especially for national security reasons, that the president's relationship with Russia, and that he's keeping, some of these readouts from these meetings from his national security officials, it's super damaging, and it will only, add to what they want to find out and what they can subpoena now that they have more power in the House.
Yeah, it's remarkable when you think about it that the president's note with another foreign leader are kept secret even from his own administration officials.
Not normal.
Not normal. All right, Elena Tree, not normal. We can all agree on that one.
Not normal.
Okay, Elena Tree, thank you very much. We're going to talk to you again in a little bit. And still ahead, we are digging into a new report that claims the White House requested options for a military strike against Iran last September.
Plus, in a tweet over the weekend, President Trump threatens to devastate Turkey's economy if it attacks Kurdish forces. We're going to talk about what this all means for U.S. foreign affairs when we come right back. Welcome back, everybody. On January 2nd, President Trump had this to say about his administration's strategy towards Iran.
Iran is a much different country right now. They're having riots every week in every city, bigger than they've ever had before. Their currency is under siege, thanks to us. A lot of bad things are happening. When we do all of the things that we've done monetarily to Iran, Iran is in trouble.
However, new reporting in the Wall Street Journal reveals that the administration wanted to do a whole lot more than just impact Tehran's economy. Last September, after militants aligned with Iran fired 3 mortars into Iraq near the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, which caused minimal damage and harmed no one, Trump's national security team, led by John Bolton, held a series of meetings and requested the Pentagon draw up options to conduct a military strike against Iran, according to current and former U.S. officials. In one of those meetings, one of Bolton's top deputies at the time, Mira Ricardel, even called the incident, quote, an act of war, and said the U.S. must respond decisively and militarily. According to a former senior U.S. administration official, quote, people were shocked. It was mind-boggling how cavalier they were about hitting Iran. Defense Department and senior American officials later confirmed the Journal's report to the New York Times, adding that then Secretary Mattis vehemently opposed a military strike, arguing the incident was insignificant. Current senior Pentagon officials also say that they are increasingly worried that Bolton could precipitate a conflict with Iran.
All right. Meanwhile, President Trump took to Twitter last night to clarify his strategy towards the Middle East, while also threatening the economy of a NATO ally, writing, quotes, starting the long overdue pullout from Syria while hitting the little remaining ISIS territorial caliphate hard and from many directions. We'll attack again from existing nearby base if it, is that right, reforms. Okay.
Yeah, if it reforms.
If it reforms. Not sure exactly what that means. Will devastate Turkey economically if they hit Kurds. Create 20-mile safe zone. Likewise, do not want the Kurds to provoke Turkey. Russia, Iran, and Syria have been the biggest beneficiaries of the long-term U.S. policy of destroying ISIS in Syria. Natural enemies. We also benefit, but it's now time to bring our troops back home. Stop the endless wars. Okay. So the person who's going to help us understand what that means, let's talk a little bit about reforming ISIS.
Okay.
Is that what he meant, reforming ISIS?
No, you think about Turkey, but I don't. Foreign policy via Twitter. So if you're going to ask me if there's a cohesive plan for Syria, as you have been for a few months, the answer lies in those tweets, which is there is no cohesive plan for Syria. Also, all of the Bolton stuff, I want to read you from 2015. This is a New York Times op-ed that Bolton writes. He writes, the inescapable conclusion is that Iran will not negotiate away its nuclear program, nor will sanctions block its building its road to its weapons infrastructure. The title of the article was "To Stop Iran's Bomb, Bomb Iran."
Wow.
So very subtle. So Bolton's position on this has
been Bolton's position on
with
this.
Iran.
We know this about Bolton.
Right. So let's not be surprised, and we got to keep an eye on it, because what we're hearing from Bolton, what we're hearing from Pompeo,
it looks like they're looking for a pretext now to escalate this with Iran, whether it's something like in Baghdad that we're seeing or something more.
And it's always one step forward, 2 steps back on these tweets. A no-fly zone and a safe zone, whatever you want to call it, which we've heard before, cannot happen without boots on the ground. How are you going to withdraw from Syria and do what the president is saying?
You know, when we were reading the piece leading up to you, we talked about how Mattis kind of was reining in President Trump. He's gone.
Right.
Now
Over
what?
this.
Over this.
Over
exactly.
this.
Yeah.
Well, we have the former head of Boeing running the Defense Department, if that makes you feel any better. And Iran is likely going to be an air war. And we know that Bolton and Pompeo have always been beyond saber-rattling towards Iran. They've always been pro-military action towards Iran. Mattis was a little bit as well. But as you say, and as a lot of people have said, the adult in the room who's going to sort of pull this back. I'll take you back to the Bob Woodward book, where he quotes Mattis, or he sources people who say that Mattis would get those calls, from Trump, saying do this, do that, and Mattis would get off the phone and say, yeah, we're not going to do that. So I don't know where we are on
Just
that.
think about it in context. We have no really generals in the White House left anymore. People that are used to being in war zones. I mean, no one that has any experience to even be on the ground to understand what goes on there.
You'd hope that at least the people at the Pentagon, the analysts at the CIA, all of those folks, when they are told to assess what would a strike cause, what would an American strike on Iran cause for the region and our security, it would be devastating. Iran is not like going after Afghanistan or going after another war-torn country.
No, but how many of those people in the Pentagon have been trying to get at Iran for many, many years? I mean, the U.S. suddenly cares about Lebanon.
There's also a reason why we've had so many proxy wars with regards to Iran and not necessarily actually gone after Iran full throttle.
But let's not talk about Mueller and what's going on with the reporting this weekend in the Post and the Times and the vacuum, right? It all matters. It all comes together. This is something that everyone has got to keep an eye on, because as the rhetoric ramps up, Iran is hearing all of it.
And of course, you've got Mike Pompeo touring the Gulf states, trying to shore up support for
his
Iran
new
policy.
Foreign policy in the Middle East, as he said in Cairo, was to get Iranian boots out of Syria.
But as we well know, let's not get it twisted, Iran likes to be in the headlines.
Definitely.
They like to be talked about.
Not shy.
Cal Perry.
Cal Perry.
Thanks,
are you coming back?
Today?
One hit wonder?
So, I don't know.
One hit wonder, always.
Cal Perry. Thanks, buddy.
One and done.
Nice to have Cal Perry in the studio with us. And let's switch gears here and get a check on your weather now with NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns. Bill, if it's not bad enough in Washington, it's a full-on snow day there.
It's a snow day. The kids are loving it. Teachers are loving it. If you have to go out there and clean it up, it's not the best. But 10.2 inches of snow officially right in downtown Washington, D.C. And they had an epic snowball fight at the Washington Monument yesterday. Hundreds of people came out, and it was perfect. It wasn't too cold, and it was just snowing lightly out there. So let's wrap up our snowstorm. It is officially just about over with. The last little flakes of snow are just still falling here, just north of Ocean City, and now all the snow totals are in. So the highest totals, by the way, were in Missouri. One spot reported 20 inches of snow, but St. Louis had 11 inches. Cincinnati was 8. Indianapolis was about 7. D.C. officially 10. Many areas of northern Virginia were in that 8 to 12 inch range. Today, by the way, it looks perfect. The roads will clear up in a hurry. 37 and sunny in D.C. this afternoon, so that'll be good. The worst of it will be this morning, kind of icy, and then it'll get much better. Then we have to talk about our next storm. On Thursday, it's in the mountainous areas of the west. California, by the way, has a horrible week of weather coming your way. A lot of flooding concerns. Friday, the snow is out in the middle of the country. Saturday, the snow is in the Ohio Valley, and starting in the Northeast Saturday night. And this looks like an ice and snowstorm for areas of the Northeast, guys, as we go throughout Sunday. So we'll pinpoint those details as we go throughout the week ahead, but a lot of travel concerns towards the end of this week.
I was really hoping for some snow. We got nothing here.
There was a dusting. I was in Brooklyn.
I was in Brooklyn as well.
You come to Brooklyn, you don't even tell us?
Oh, wait, you live in Brooklyn?
We both live in Brooklyn. Reach out to your colleagues. All right, Bill.
Nice to meet you guys.
Reach out to your colleagues.
Still ahead. He hasn't been White House Chief of Staff for very long, but new reports claim President Trump is already lashing out at Mick Mulvaney over the government shutdown. We're going to have that story straight ahead.
Welcome back. Time now for sports. We begin in the NFL, where the conference championship matchups are now set following a weekend of divisional playoffs. We go
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Yasmin Vasugian alongside Ayman Mohideen and Louis Bergdorf. It is the bottom of the hour. Let's start with the morning's top stories. Congressional leaders warning President Trump that his comments about an upcoming congressional witness could be construed as a crime. In an interview over the weekend, President Trump said this about the upcoming public testimony of his former lawyer and business associate, Michael Cohen, and Cohen's family.
he's in trouble on some loans and fraud and taxi cabs and stuff that I know nothing about. And in order to get a sentence reduced, he says, I have an idea. I'll give you some information on the president. Well, there is no information, but he should give information maybe on his father-in-law, because that's the one that people want to look at, because where does that money? That's the money in the family. And I guess he didn't want to talk about his father-in-law. He's trying to get his sentence reduced. So it's pretty sad. It's weak.
What is his father-in-law's name?
I don't know, but you'll find out and you'll look into it, because nobody knows what's going on over there.
In response, the Democratic chairman of the Oversight, Intelligence, and Judiciary Committees in the House issued a joint statement. Quote, the integrity of our process to serve as an independent check on the executive branch must be respected by everyone, including the president. Our nation's laws prohibit efforts to discourage, intimidate, or otherwise pressure a witness not to provide testimony to Congress. The president should make no statement or take any action to obstruct Congress's independent oversight and investigative efforts, including by seeking to discourage any witness from testifying in response to a duly authorized request from Congress.
And there's a growing interest among some in Congress over a potential deal that would have involved Donald Trump putting another Trump Tower just outside of Russia's capital. Two congressional aides have told NBC News that House and Senate investigators are now focusing on the project, which Trump sought to complete before his presidential nomination. According to congressional testimony and reports, the Russians named the proposed development Manhattan, and a Trump Tower would have been its centerpiece. Trump's partner in the project would have been the Russian oligarch Aras Aglarov. Aglarov is believed to have close ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin and is the same man who's promised dirt on Hillary Clinton, and that led to the infamous June 2016 meeting in New York at the Trump Tower. A lawyer for Aglarov tells NBC News it is misleading to suggest that his client is close to Putin, but declined to respond to specific questions. The congressional aides say that Aglarov and his project are drawing fresh scrutiny following the revelation in court documents that President Trump's former lawyer Michael Cohen lied to Congress about his dealings on a separate, competing Russia real estate project.
All right, the confirmation hearing of President Trump's pick to be the next attorney general is set to kick off tomorrow, and there are expectations for plenty of fireworks when it comes to questioning Bill Barr over the future of special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe. According to the Washington Post, Barr is expected to resist demands from Democrats on the Judiciary Committee for explicit promises about the fate of Mueller's investigation. The Post says that in private conversations with committee members last week, Barr looked to assure lawmakers he has no plan to interfere with Mueller's work. The committee's top Democrat, Senator Dianne Feinstein, says that she intends to get that promise from Barr on record, adding, quote, it's very important that Mueller be able to have no interference whatsoever. Barr's confirmation hearing is scheduled to last for 2 days. His nomination is not expected to be in jeopardy, with Republicans holding the majority on the Judiciary Committee and in the Senate.
And White House Chief Economic Advisor Kevin Hassett compared the government shutdown impacting nearly 800,000 federal workers to a free vacation. Take a listen.
Huge share of government workers were going to take vacation days, say between Christmas and New Year's. And then we have a shutdown, and so they can't go to work, and so then they have the vacation, but they don't have to use their vacation days. And then they come back, and then they get their back pay, then they're, in some sense, they're better off.
This past Friday marked the first paycheck thousands of federal workers missed, prompting some to sell their belongings or launch side businesses to make ends meet while the shutdown continues to drag on. Also on Friday, Congress passed a bill to repay workers for their lost wages once the shutdown eventually comes to an end.
A webpage blasting border walls and fences has disappeared from a Border Patrol Union website. The National Border Patrol Council's now deleted frequently asked questions page, calling the building of a border wall a waste of taxpayer money and arguing that border barriers do not tackle the root causes of migration. Had been published since 2012. Well, it was removed earlier this month after the council endorsed President Trump's $5.7 billion wall proposal. Council President Brandon Judd, who was elected in 2013 and endorsed Trump during his 2016 campaign, told Politico the page represented the position of previous union leaders, but was ultimately taken down for causing confusion, quote, because it continually gets brought up.
And while meeting with the top congressional leaders of both parties earlier this month, President Trump harshly criticized his new chief of staff over the shutdown negotiations. Two sources who were present tell Axios that it happened in the Situation Room on January 4th when Mick Mulvaney tried to negotiate a compromise sum of money for the wall. One of the sources said Mulvaney was saying that if Dems weren't okay with $5.7 billion and the president wasn't okay with $1.3 billion, the Democratic offer, he was trying to say we should find some middle ground. Quote, Trump cut him off. You just blanked it all up, Mick, the source recalled Trump saying. It was kind of weird. Another source who was in the room confirmed the account. Now, two Trump advisors familiar with the exchange confirmed the story to the Washington Post, Robert Costa. Quote, one compared it to the scene in The Godfather when Don Vito tells Sonny he shouldn't speak up during negotiations.
I'm not sure a mob reference.
That way.
I was going to say, I'm not sure a mob reference is a good look for the president.
Joining us once again, Associate News Editor and reporter for Axios, Elena Train. Elena, good to see you again. Let's talk shutdown here. Officially surpassing all records in U.S. history. Unbelievable, to say the least. How is this reflecting on the president and the GOP in general?
Well, no one really wants a shutdown, and I think that people on both sides of the aisle are saying, you know, to hold a shutdown over people's head as part of a negotiation isn't really the way you want to, you know, run the government. And I think that from both congressional and senior administration officials that I've spoken with, they both see that really right now there's a lot of confusion over this, and there's not really a clear exit ramp for ending this shutdown. And I think over the next few weeks, the president really, he's not going to want to make any sort of decision to reopen the government until he sees a concession from Democrats, which is also looking very unlikely now that Democrats have taken back the House.
So, Elena, let me switch gears for a moment and get your thoughts on the confirmation of William Barr as the next Attorney General. He was up on the Hill last week, I believe, having meetings with members of the Judiciary Committee. But let's talk a little bit about what his potential confirmation means for the Mueller probe.
Well, that's where all eyes on this are right now, especially given how much the president has been upset with his former Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, for recusing himself from this. A lot of people want to know what role William Barr will play in the Russia investigation and how much independence Robert Mueller will still have. William Barr has told people in committee hearings, and we saw the Washington Post report this, that he does not want to interfere. But beyond that, he hasn't really said, you know, any explicitly what his plans for this Mueller investigation are, and especially with him as an Attorney General. And I think we can see a lot of people, especially Democrats on that Senate Judiciary Committee, pressing him on this.
Yeah, I wonder if it's going to be as contentious as some of the other hearings we've seen for some of President Trump's senior posts. We'll have to wait and see. Elena Train live in Washington.
Elena.
Thanks, Elena.
Thank you.
All right, still ahead, everybody. More Democrats throw their hats into the 2020 presidential ring. A look at who's making a bid for the White House.
Plus, Congressman Steve King, he's facing backlash once again from fellow Republicans over his controversial comments on white nationalism and white supremacy.
And Bill Caron's back with details on the bitterly cold temperatures pushing across the country. We'll be right back.
Top Republican lawmakers are questioning Congressman Steve King's political future in the wake of his controversial stance on white supremacy. Now, here's what a few had to say over the weekend.
I've watched on the other side that they do not take action when their members say something like this. Action will be taken. I'm having a serious conversation with Congressman Steve King on his future and role in this Republican Party.
What Steve King said was stupid. It was stupid, it was hurtful, it was wrong, and he needs to stop it.
Are you going to support him in the future?
You know, what I'm going to do is urge everyone to stand for principles that matter.
Yes or no, will Republican leaders call for any action against Congressman King?
I would imagine we're going to continue talking about this. This just popped up on Friday.
All right, so House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said he will meet with Congressman Steve King about his inflammatory comments later today. In the meantime, South Carolina Republican Senator Tim Scott published a scathing op-ed in the Washington Post on his party's seemingly softened response to King's actions and others like it in the past. In fact, he writes, quote, when people with opinions similar to King's open their mouths, they damage not only the Republican Party and the conservative brand, but also our nation as a whole. Some in our party wonder why Republicans are constantly accused of racism. It is because of our silence when things like this are said.
All right, the 2020 Democratic presidential field is beginning to line up with a few more additions over the weekend. After much speculation, former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Julian Castro announced his bid for the presidency from his hometown of San Antonio on Saturday.
When my grandmother got here almost 100 years ago, I'm sure that she never could have imagined that just 2 generations later, one of her grandsons would be serving as a member of the United States Congress, and the other would be standing with you here today to say these words: I am a candidate for President of the United States of America.
And as the grandson of Mexican immigrants, Julian Castro went on to announce his candidacy for president in Spanish as well. Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard also made her intentions to run for president clear during a CNN interview that aired on Saturday. The Iraq War veteran says she plans to make a formal announcement in the next week. And BuzzFeed reports that New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand recently signaled her interest in a 2020 presidential bid to a group of politically influential women in search for their support. And just last week, a top aide for Gillibrand told BuzzFeed that the senator would likely announce an exploratory committee in the, quote, coming weeks.
All right, let's get a check on your weather now with NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns. Bill, even a few inches of snow is not good news for Washington. They usually have a tough time with it, never mind 10 inches.
Yeah, but at least it happened on the weekend. So I know they had to shut schools down today, and you know, everything's pretty much closed. So the big dig out is occurring. 8 to 12 inches of snow in the nation's capital, one of the biggest snowstorms they've seen in about 3 to 4 years. St. Louis, by the way, saw your biggest snowstorm in about 5 years. So let's take a look at the week ahead. And if you like winter and you like cold, this is the weather pattern that's setting up for you. We're going to have numerous storms in the next 3 weeks, and it looks like big cold outbreaks. The coldest of the season is coming our way. So enjoy this today. It's very mild. We're pretty nice. We're calm. We're digging out. A storm is coming into California with a little bit of rain and snow. We'll take a little piece of that into areas of the plains by Wednesday. Still very quiet, the eastern half of the country. Here comes our big storm into California. A lot of flood threats this week. We're going to see the burn scar areas with the risk of those mud and debris flows, and, of course, the heavy snow at the high elevations. We take a little storm through the northeast as we go throughout Friday. Maybe a little bit of light snow and a little bit of ice. Not going to be a huge impact storm, but this will be a big impact storm. That's the one that was on the West Coast. Then on Friday, it's from the Rockies out into the plains. Saturday and Sunday, it's going to head towards the East Coast. So here's one of our long-range computer models. We talk a lot about our European computer model. Tends to be the most accurate. I'm not going to put snowfall amounts on this, but I'll just kind of put it in general categories of light, moderate, and heavy. This is from now all the way through Sunday, and this is primarily going to be Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Possibility of at least heavy snow from Kansas through Missouri, the northern Ohio Valley, right through interior sections of the Northeast into northern New England. Notice the cities on I-95 are kind of in that transition zone. So we'll monitor this as we go throughout this week, but at least there's the potential for a significant snow event for the first time really this winter in areas of central and in portions of the Northeast.
All right, Bill, thanks for that. Still ahead, China's trade surplus with the U.S. climbs to its highest level ever amid the ongoing trade war between Washington and Beijing.
Plus, travelers at 2 of this country's busiest airports feel the impact of the government's ongoing shutdown this weekend. Details and the stories driving your business day next.
Welcome back. China's trade surplus with the U.S. hit a new record last year, jumping 17% as President Trump's tariff offensive was undercut by American demand. CNBC's Juliana Tattlebaum joins us live from London with more. And how might these numbers impact the market and the ongoing trade negotiations?
Well, Louis, as you say, the interesting bit about these numbers is the fact that despite President Trump's imposition of tariffs, we've actually seen the trade gap between the U.S. and China widen as opposed to narrow. Now, part of the reason for this is that the Chinese currency has weakened, which makes U.S. goods less competitive in China. But from a global perspective, we did see the Chinese trade gap shrink. So Chinese exports actually shrank 4.4% globally. So looking beyond just the U.S., this has raised some concern this morning around global demand. Now, I want to shift gears. A corporate story that is worth paying attention to today. PG&E Corp. This is the utility company at the heart of the California wildfires. Has been under a huge amount of pressure and scrutiny. Yesterday, we heard that the CEO has stepped down and will be replaced by an interim CEO, their general counsel. Now, this company is facing a potential $30 billion in liabilities and investigations and is reportedly considering a bankruptcy filing. So certainly one to watch. Back to you.
And a story story that's on a lot of travelers' minds. With more than 50,000 TSA agents working without pay, airports around the country are experiencing staffing issues as instances of calling out sick, quitting, and unscheduled absences rise as the government shutdown enters its 4th week. The question is, how are the airports and the agency adjusting? You talk about putting the security and safety of Americans at risk.
We've actually seen a couple of airports have to shut down terminals and concourses. We saw Houston's International Airport have to close one of their terminals. We also saw the Miami International Airport have to close one of their concourses on a partial basis. Now, they are planning to reopen that one in Miami today, but are potentially going to have to close more checkpoints if the situation doesn't improve. Now, the agency has stepped in and intervened. They have offered employees 1 day's work of 1 day's work pay and also a $500 bonus, but they acknowledge this does not compensate for all of the wages that have been lost. Back to you.
All right, Juliana Tattlebaum live from London. Thanks so much.
All right, coming up, everybody. Axios' Mike Allen has looked at this morning's one big thing. And coming up on Morning Joe, the ongoing government shutdown takes a toll on President Trump and congressional Republicans.
We're going to have more on the new poll numbers showing a majority of Americans blaming the president and the GOP for the longest shutdown in U.S. history. Plus, the New York Times' Michael Schmidt. He's going to join us. He's going to have a lot more on his bombshell report on the FBI's investigation into whether President Trump had been working against American interests on behalf of Russia. Morning Joe, just moments away.
Welcome back, everybody. Joining us from Washington, we'll look at Axios AM, the co-founder of Axios, Mike Allen. Mike, good morning to
Mike.
you. We don't
Happy snowy Monday.
Happy snow. I was going to say, we don't have any snow up here. Lucky you.
Talk to us about Axios' one big thing today.
Yeah, so the time that Trump trashed his own chief. So we heard a little bit about this on the show just a second ago, and here's why it matters. So the president is in a meeting with Chuck and Nancy, as he calls them, the Democratic leaders, and his chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, is trying to move toward a compromise, what I think everybody on the outside wants them to do. And he suggests a couple of figures that could maybe get them to reopening the government, which over the weekend set a record for the length of this shutdown. And the president cut him off, jumped on him, used a curse word, as he said, Mick, you just messed it all up. And he didn't say messed. So why does that matter in Axios style? One, we can see that the president is more interested in the bargaining positions than in actually getting to yes. And second, it's a reminder of what we see around the world, and that is that one person speaks for this government, for this administration. That's President Trump. When the White House chief of staff can't try and broker a deal with Democratic leaders, which is kind of his job, that's a sign of why things are going the way they are.
All right, so let me get your thoughts then about this government shutdown, and let's talk a little bit about how it's playing out for the president, particularly in Trump states, because it is affecting, obviously, the entire country, and the poll suggests that Americans view the GOP and Trump responsible for it. I know that you guys have some new information on how it's affecting Trump states.
Yeah, look at this. This is really interesting. So we had a map that we shared with you here on MSNBC about how Trump's tariffs were hitting Trump states the hardest. Similar effect with the shutdown, that if you look at the states with the highest concentration of federal employees, 6 of the top 10 are states that the president wants. So a lot of these are out west. We're talking Idaho, South Dakota, and Montana, states that have a lot of western lands. And if you look at the federal employees per 10,000, like they're the highest out there. So this is another place where President Trump's policies are hitting President Trump's voters.
All right, let's talk about AOC, or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We know that Axios is looking at her and her domination, really, of the Democratic conversation on Twitter. How much pull does she actually have online?
Well, this is amazing. We dug into the data and found that she has more Twitter engagement, so that's likes plus retweets. You can see it here, more than any Democratic leader, more than any 2020 candidate, and more than news organizations. So what we can learn from this is that just as personalities in the media world have driven conversation on Twitter, now we see what a brand that's native to Twitter can do. And she was Ocasio 2018 during the campaign. Now she got the coveted handle of just AOC, so that is becoming her online name. And we're seeing that just by responding to everything, just like the president does, that she engages massive amounts of mind share.
Well, and think about how quickly her rise has been. I can't imagine how many followers she had before she actually won her seat versus now.
Yeah. Mike Allen live in Washington, D.C. Thanks, Mike. We're going to be reading at 6 a.m. in just a little bit. And to all of our viewers out there,